So tonight we're going to be talking about art, social activism, and restorative justice with our conversation with Jo Kreiter of Flyaway Productions. Tonight we're going to explore Ms. Kreiter's creative and social practice, the practice of working with individuals with lived experiences, her Decarceration series, and specifically Apparatus of Repair, which is the final in the Decarceration series, which is currently in development and will be continued to be developed while Jo and her dancers and composer are with us at Bethany in April, and then presented at Bethany in October. So we are very excited. This residency and production with Jo is part of our season of justice. And during the season of the year of 2022 and through this season, we're curating a series of programs that endeavor to deepen our understanding of some of today's most pressing societal issues, including the American justice system, the criminalization of otherness, which includes color, ethnicity, religion, and explore themes of isolation, healing, and hope. Before we move on, we want to thank, as always, our sponsors and collaborators, the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Council on the Arts, Arts Westchester, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, Hudson Link for Higher Education, and the Sing Sing Prison Museum. So welcome, and welcome Jo, who's our special guest tonight.
Thanks,
so let me just say a few words, Jo, about you. This is what I always call the embarrassment time. So Jo is a nationally recognized choreographer and sight artist with a background in political science. She makes large-scale public art via apparatus-based dance. Jo has spent 25 years building coalitions with women marginalized by race, class, gender, and workplace inequities. Noted partners have included the SE Justice Group, UC Hastings Center for Work, Life, and Law, Tenderloin Museum, Code Tenderloin, and more. Jo has received numerous awards, including New England Foundation for the Arts National Dance Project Awards, Guggenheim Fellowship, the Rauschenberg Artist as Activist Fellowship, the California Arts Council's Creative California's Communities Award, and 5 Isadora Duncan Dance Awards. Jo has also written numerous articles about her site-based dance and her practice generally. She's the founder of Girl Fly, which is an award-winning dance and activism program addressing the lack of arts training opportunities and gender-specific social pressures faced by low-income teen girls and youth. So, Jo, welcome.
Thank you. I'm not embarrassed. I'm good. I'm holding steady. Thank you.
Good. That's what we like. So Jo, as we get started here today, for those people who have not seen your work and who don't know much about what you do, can you help explain your practice and maybe give folks a bit of a visual? We talk about apparatus-based dance and large-scale public art and site-based art. Can you give us a sense of what those terms mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of language internationally for dancers who work off the ground. Sometimes it's called vertical dance, sometimes it's called aerial dance. And I was pretty specific in choosing the language apparatus-based dance. Sometimes I'm working with something as huge as a 1-ton spinning wheel, as I did with the weight room, and that piece presented itself in downtown Ossining a couple of years ago. And I've worked with a whistle as a piece of apparatus, a whistle on a rope around someone's neck. So I like the word apparatus because it can scale. I tend toward the larger scale, but in the upcoming piece that we're bringing to Ossining, one of the pieces of apparatus is a bucket. So I work with something called live load rigging, which means objects that are suspended that can take the body's weight. And it opens up worlds when you can be in suspension in the air in relationship to both an object and at times the side of a building as well. So that gives you a lot of tools with which to create choreography. And it also has limits. To be off the ground in a safe way, you are usually suspended in a rope and harness. And we use traditional climbing harnesses, and they free the body and they also limit the body. So it's really fun to me and interesting to do two things. One is to push against all the ways that the harness limits the body, and to really delve into all the ways that apparatus can create more vocabulary. I'm also really interested in the invention of objects that serve the content I'm working with. And as I create large-scale public art, I really start with the issue. And I think that comes from having a political science background. I spent a long time in my early 20s, really torn between wanting to be a dance artist and wanting to be a political scientist in action, not so much in the academy. And I realized through meeting groups like the Dance Brigade based here in San Francisco, that I could actually put those two interests together. And I have spent a lifetime developing that vision. So for me, the work starts with an issue. And then the question is, where does that issue live in the world? And we go to that place. And then how do we manifest that issue physically and visually? And that's where the apparatus comes in. And the last component, well, the second to last component is the choreography. How can the body be in motion to articulate something that's going to move audiences to care about this issue? And I say second to last because another very large component of my work is original sound score. So I've spent 96 to 22, how many years is that? 26 years commissioning women composers. That's something that's really important to me. Women composers are contemporary women composers especially are in a field that is male dominated, and it's just really been a blessing and a goal to elevate women's voices musically. So that's also a large part of the work.
Okay, that's wonderful. You said two things that kind of, I guess, surprised me. So one, you kind of defined. You said I think if I got it right, that you pick the space, you begin to pick what the objects will be, and then you move to the choreography. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, for somebody from the outside, that seems flipped.
Oh yeah, the choreography comes last because, I mean, that's how I work. I mean, other choreographers are very different, but because once you get the object going, the question is, well, what can the body do with this object? What makes sense? What can the body do that's pushing the envelope, that engages risk, but that also keeps the dancers safe? And then from there, once you have a pool of possibility, then the movement gets set. And I am very much a director. I'm also a choreographer. With most of the dancers I work with most of the time, we are in choreographic collaboration. So I might say, show me 3 ways that you can, for example, with the video edit we're working with cages. Show me 3 ways that you can circle that cage without coming out of it. And then the dancer creates the specificity of those 3 circles. So I am directing, I am saying, yes, more of this, more of that, and giving the prompts to use the language of writing. And then there are other times where I'm much more hands-on. I will get into the cage and say, this is the option. Can you do this? But every body is a little different. And then sometimes when I'm making an ensemble, it's easier for me to ask for very specific physicality, like what happens if you put your right foot there and your left foot twists, and then we go from there. And one person does exactly what I ask and someone else does not what I ask, but it turns out to be way better than what I asked for. And so that becomes the movement of that moment. It's very, very collaborative, and yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So why don't we take a pause here for a moment and just give, for those who have not seen any of your work, just a really short clip that we will share. So one moment.
Set it up. This is a 1-minute excerpt of Meet Us Quickly with Your Mercy, which is the second in the trilogy of dances I have been making. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to make sure it starts at the beginning. Stop that. It helps. Excellent. All right. So one of the things I just noticed, Jo, which I haven't talked to, really kind of recognized before, is the shadows.
Mhm.
Where they become more dancers.
Yeah, it depends a lot on the piece. That piece was really enhanced by the lighting and the shadowing. It had a lot to do with the topography of the walls and the way they were laid out. We actually danced on 3 buildings for that project, using all different kinds of sides of those buildings, sides and one corner. So our lighting designer, Jack, is also going to be lighting the piece we're bringing to Bethany, and he lit the weight room, and is just a master at pulling out those shadows. Though, one of the things, we spoke about making public art, one of the limitations we deal with is because we're in public, we don't have a film budget. We're not Hollywood. So we don't have utter and complete control of where the lighting can go. Like for that piece, there were some big limitations. There was this parking lot we weren't allowed to touch. So where we could have put lighting in certain places, we didn't, because we didn't have access. And so that is a factor in public art. There are limitations and there are beauties. And the beauty is that that phrase that I use a lot is the democratization of public space, where you're bringing very thoughtful and sophisticated work to a general public that, 90% of whom, at least for that piece, don't go inside a theater and don't see live performance that's lit and that has originally commissioned sound scores and all of the, the depth that we try to get into the work that we bring to the public.
Right. So you mentioned the weight room. So why don't we switch and talk? Can you just share with everybody a little bit about the Decarceration series? Why you're doing this? What's your motivation? And introduce to us also the Apparatus of Repair, since that's the work that you'll do when you come to Bethany.
Yeah, so the Decarceration Trilogy is based in the ideal of dismantling the prison industrial complex one dance at a time. It's a very ambitious ideal. And yet over the last 6 or 7 years, I feel like we've had a lot of success in connecting with some deep activism and some, the deep efforts to really shift what prison systems are. So the weight room was the first in the trilogy, and it looked at the experience of women with incarcerated loved ones. And that is also my story, though my partner is now home. So I am a woman with a formerly incarcerated loved one. And our primary partner for that project was Essie Justice Group, which is an organization that I'm still working with, pretty intensely. And Essie works with a healing to advocacy trajectory for women with incarcerated loved ones. So gathering us together, not because we are sad and pathetic, but because we are powerful in what we know about the prison system and how it's really not serving public safety. It is not a tool that serves public safety in any way, shape, or form. And so the piece was an oral history of 6 different women with incarcerated loved ones, and what it was a telling of what our experience is. And that piece took place literally right next to Sing Sing in that park. I don't know the name of the park, Abby, but you probably do. That downtown park.
Yeah, the downtown park. We're going to go. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that's right. It's got the Sing Sing prison right behind and up the hill from it, and the water and the train. Yep.
Yeah, so we could see the prison right as a backdrop. And then the second in the trilogy shifted gear a little bit and asked the question, how can Black and Jewish voices work together to amplify the call for racial justice via an end to mass incarceration? And that was a concept that came to me in a very personal way, like going through prisons. My husband was in 3 different prisons. So in going through prisons to visit him, the way that you walk in a door and a door shuts behind you and the door in front of you hasn't opened and you're really caged. And for me, that moment really conjuring the genetic memory, I call it, of what it was to be Jewish and, caged inside the apparatus of the Holocaust. And so wanting, as a person who's Jewish, whose partner was incarcerated, wanting to pull the Jewish community in and join with Black voices who, are already deeply involved in asking for, demanding prison systems change. And, also recognizing the long and complicated and complex and not always pretty history between Black and Jewish communities, wanting to cull the best of that communication. And so for that project, we worked with Bethany, which is a national organization of Jewish action, and with MOAD, the Museum of African Diaspora here, and also with an organization called Prison Renaissance, which connects folks who are working from inside the walls with folks who are working outside the walls. And so one of the things that's important to me is to really highlight the voices of the incarcerated in this struggle, because those are the people who are living the impact of incarceration and who know firsthand its impact. And so I have, impact from the prison system, but it's in no way the same as someone who is or has been imprisoned. So one of the things that we work to do is to amplify that voice as well. So my partner for Mercy was a man named Rassan Thomas, who has worked with me from his cell in San Quentin. We've been working together the last 3 years. We're going to continue working together. And his sentence was actually commuted by the governor of California, though he remains behind bars because the process of moving someone out is incredibly painfully and wrongfully slow. So he was a primary partner and taught me a lot. We had some really deep racial justice conversations. He was very corrective of me in the beginning around shifting a mentality from white saviorism to collaboration. And that was really useful because originally my thought with that project, well, how can Jewish voices amplify the call for racial justice? He's like, no, Jo. He's like, it's Black and Jewish voices together. And that was wonderfully corrective, and our conversations continued to really grow. And that created Mercy, which you saw in a teeny way on that video. And then that brings me to the third in the trilogy, which is called Apparatus of Repair. And apparatus is an interesting word because I use it, of course, as an aerial dancer. Apparatus is a word that's applied to the legal system. It's used in the courts, the apparatus of the courts. And so I wanted to pull the word into the specifics of, repairing harm. And I mean that both systemically and individually. So when we talk about repairing the harms of the prison system, we're talking about a system that was built, deeply on racial injustice and racial dehumanization and has continued that way. But we're also talking about individual harms. And so the project is really looking at balancing voices impacted by individual harm and systemic harm. And that's what we hope to bring to the public. It's a very complex project. It's probably the most emotional of the three of the trilogy, partly because many of the dancers in the project are survivors of violent crime. And that wasn't something I chose. I didn't go seeking dancers who were survivors of violent crime, and yet most of the dancers I work with were or are. And so that wasn't, one of my dancers called me recently and it's like, Jo, was that a requirement? This is someone who's been working with me for like 7 years. I'm like, no, it wasn't a requirement, but it was a fact.
Certainly says something about the statistics, right?
Yeah.
Violence against women.
It very much shows the statistics about violence against women and the numbers of us who never reported, which was almost all of us. One person reported. Actually, no, I'm wrong. 2 people reported. So anyway, I lost my train of thought, but yes, this has been very emotional. We have rooted the project in process in that the dancers and I and our community partner here in the Bay Area, Community Works, we did a 5-week restorative justice session with ourselves and 2 people who are male identified who were incarcerated for between 27 and 35 years. And so the group of us sat down together over 5 weeks and talked and asked questions and got to some understanding of how we felt about alternatives to incarceration and how we felt about our own healing journey. And one of the things that came forward is that as a group of artists, or I would say as a group of citizens, we are not all on the same page. We don't all feel the same. And so it's my responsibility as the director to honor where the dancers are and simultaneously to advance what I believe based on my own experience of the prison system.
Interesting. So Jo, I think some people may not know what traditional. There's nothing traditional about restorative justice, right? It's a very, very new. But if we're talking about restorative justice, that's usually, as I understand it, a person who's done harm and the person who has been harmed in conversation. Can you maybe say just a little bit about that, and then what restorative justice, because you're doing a number of circles as you both develop this piece, and we've talked about some circling after the presentation of the piece, which is going to look very different, right? It's not pairs of people who've been harmed and those who've done harm. So can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I like to say is that restorative justice is as varied as modern dance. It does not fit into one single definition. It is sometimes used inside the current system and sometimes used outside. There are more and more diversion programs where those who have caused harm are offered a restorative justice process, which means very much what you said, Abby, which is that, what was the harm? How was someone hurt? How do we make it right? Those are the questions. They're very basic and fundamental, but the harm is not basic or fundamental. And for me, restorative justice makes so much more sense than our current punitive system, because it's driven by the drivers of violence themselves, which are identified by Danielle Sered, who's runs Common Justice in New York, and is someone whose work I deeply admire. But she talks about, the drivers of violence are shame, isolation, the inability to take care of yourself, and being around violence. And those are things that our prison systems cultivate. So something has gone very wrong. And we are not necessarily working to be corrective. Most of the people who go into prison come out. And so it just seems so logical that we need to think about processes that create change, healing within those people, which is not to say they are. The other thing I want to say about restorative justice, it's not about an end of accountability. It's about a different kind of accountability that, in my opinion, is much more personal and difficult. In the restorative justice circle we just did with the public, so I call it an RJ circle lightly, because an RJ circle really has confidentiality as its frame. And then when you're in a public circle, there is no confidentiality. So you're already out of the paradigm. But when we did, God, I totally lost my train of thought again. What was I talking about?
RJ circle and what you.
Yes. So, yeah, I've just totally lost it. I'm so sorry. There's so much to say all the time.
There's so much.
There's so many complexities to this particular work. Oh, I know what I was going to say, that the two folks that we worked with in this public circle, they spoke a lot about that moment where they had to look in the mirror and say, I did this. For one of the women that was a participant, she said, it took me 12 years. And then I did get to that point, and then I was ready. And one of the things that got her ready was hearing from people who'd been harmed, and she was able to understand her own actions in a very different way. So that idea of looking in the mirror, punitive justice doesn't ask you to look in the mirror. It asks you to sit in a cage.
Right. And so much there as well, if I remember correctly, that individual who said it took 12 years, and then there was some number of years of really feeling like they were rehabilitating themselves or setting them on a new path. And then I was another 15 years or something before they actually got out. So this is a very long, isolating, delayed process. So Jo, let's move to April. So in April, right, as part of the development, you will be here at Bethany, and you will be talking to people who are either now incarcerated at Sing Sing, or who have been incarcerated at Sing Sing, and we're going to see how all of that works given the environment. But you will also be working with a collaborator who is on the inside of Sing Sing.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little bit about what it's like and how you know, to work with individuals with these lived experiences, and then maybe more specifically, so you have these conversations, how does that get reflected in the ultimate piece?
That's a great question. Just now at home, we made a section of the work. We made it on the, not on the ground, but we made it inside a warehouse, and it's going to get flipped to a wall. So it's a little different how we made it versus how it's going to show up. That's one thing we're going to work on in April. But anyway, that really centers the voices of survivors. And as I was making that, I realized I want an equal section in this work that centers the voices of those who are incarcerated and or have caused harm. And so that's, and my promise to Bethany is that we would cultivate that voice in the project. And I just, in the making of the one section, I'm very clear now about that balance in the piece. So I'm really excited to come with that clarity. And how that exactly happens is the magic of art. One of the things we did is we worked with the senses, dear lips, dear heart, dear eyes. So we worked with how a body sees, feels, hears, tastes. So one of the things that I want to bring to the folks we're going to be working with, and it's a little up in the air because of, all of our lives are a little up in the air with COVID, is, how do we use the senses to get into a conversation about harm, and about harm caused, harm felt, harm created by the prison system itself, systemic harms created by being born in America with skin color that's not my skin color. All these harms getting equal consideration as we consider those who have caused harm. And so I'm interested and excited to marry the senses with that conversation, because it's a hard ask, and the senses can soften. And we certainly found that working with survivors of harm, like going through the senses was a little indirect, and it made it a little easier and more accessible to articulate one's feelings and experience. And I do really want to credit Maddie Clifford. She goes by Mad Lines. She's a rapper and a composer, and it is her wordsmithing that gets us to the lyric. And it is myself and the dancers that equal those concepts in the body. And so it's a process. And one of the things that I've already spoken with one of the men who is inside is that Flyaway will bring one prompt for the group, and that he will bring one prompt for the group, because he sits in a situation I don't sit in. And so I'm really excited to see what he brings, but it's something that I am not capable of imagining from my body and my experience. So that's just one way that we are honoring restorative justice, which gives equal value to all in the room, but also asks for accountability. So as someone is sitting with us in circle and has to say, in a letter to their own heart, what they've done, there is an accountability in the looking in the mirror. Sometimes it's the beginning. Sometimes the people we are going to be working with might be way developed on their journey. I don't actually know that yet. That's something we'll find out as we go.
Right. And a little bit more specifically, as I understand it, and I've seen, right, part of the reflection can be through the composition, right? Mm-hmm. So the composer integrates some of, with the weight room, right? Mm-hmm. Some of the voices of the women. Mm-hmm. And then I imagine that some of it also gets incorporated through the objects that you use, as well as the choreography. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I mean, the object, I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, no, and don't tell anybody the specifics. I'm thinking more of how, your process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, the objects really come from the content. And one of the object series we're working with are a set of bars, like the prison bars, but these bars are going to be mounted on wheels so that they can roll along the wall. And that is an engineering technology we have never done. Usually we're like, watch out, make sure it doesn't slam back into the wall. But now we've got these wheels to soften the relationship between the building and the object. But as I am thinking about this one section of, voice of the incarcerated and the expertise and the wisdom of that person reflecting, taking accountability for themselves, that they will be placed between those two bars. And so that is a physical manifestation of where that person is in their lives, literally, like behind the bars in Sing Sing. That's just one example.
Yeah. Wonderful. So Jo, criminal justice, the carceral system, these are really tough, complex, stark topics, mm-hmm. right? But you're using art, mm-hmm. right? You're using art to have a conversation about this topic that is so difficult. Why and what do you think that art brings to this conversation, either in terms of how we have a dialogue about it or who we bring to that conversation? What's the role of art in this?
Mm. Well, I'm thinking about a survey we just got back from our last event, and one person said that when she was watching the dance, she didn't have to think for a little bit, and she could just absorb without going through, the front of the brain, the thinking brain, the judging brain, the editing brain. And that then after the show, and when we entered conversation, or after the showing, she was able to marry that sensed experience with her thoughts and her questions and her own discomfort. And I think that's what art brings. I mean, it brings kinetic opportunity. It brings the senses enlivened with lighting, with sound, with motion. We work through spectacle. You see things that you're like, how is that body doing that? So there's some wonder. And I feel like these are all elements that they do two things that soften your critical mind, but also get you outside and get you into the material sideways. I know that's my own experience, like just like living my life and especially when I was raising a child alone and my husband was incarcerated, and so many nights where I couldn't get him on the phone, and you're like, is he in solitary? What is going on? Why isn't he calling? Like, is the place in a riot? Like, you just get no information. It's like the lack of information is so stressful. And for me to be able to dance and get outside of that worry and just be in my body and let my fingertips and the bottoms of my feet and the folds in my elbows carry that worry instead of my mind, it lightened me. And so we try to bring that for audiences, that same experience.
That's wonderful. So first of all, I'm just going to say, in a little bit, we'll wrap and we'll be asking if the audience has questions. So if anybody on wants to, you're welcome to put it in the Q&A. If you have a question or put it in the chat, that's easy as well. So folks should go ahead and
we love questions.
Exactly. So I guess, Jo, you've been doing this for, as you said, I think it turned out to be 26 years. And you are dealing with, as we said, some of the toughest topics, and you have, committed to doing it, working with those people who have the real lived experiences. So this is hard work. As you've done this, what have you learned about working with these collaborators and the dancers themselves who are individuals with these experiences?
Well, I think something that is brewing right now for me is, what is my place as a white artist talking about mass incarceration and prison abolition? And I am aware that my job is to work with a lot of sensitivity around where I step up and where I step back. But how to do that is a little bit of a mystery at times. And so that's a crux for me in this work. What are the moments where I speak? And what are the moments where I don't speak? And I say, well, maybe you should ask so-and-so on that panel instead. That's like a really easy thing. The cruxes aren't that easy. Like, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, you shouldn't have me, you should have her. She's an amazing resource. One of my Essie sisters, for example, like, that's easy, like, of course, but there's other places that aren't so easy for me. So that's something that I'm contending with a bit right now through some complexities of the making of this piece. At the same time, most of the people I meet who I've met inside or who are returning citizens are really how do I say it? Interested in collaboration with people who can bring resources to the fight. And that's clear. And so that's a really exciting kind of collaboration. So understanding a power dynamic around race, class, education, freedom, and working the line between living in privilege and leveraging privilege. That's a really important part of this work for me. I don't always hit the line right, but I get a lot of support from colleagues like Rasan Thomas. We've had multiple conversations about this, like my SE sisters who are 99% women of color. So that's a wonderful thing. The other thing I'll say is that in the harm equation, looking beyond race or outside of race, I don't even know how to say that. See, there's some really good language right there that I don't have, but I'll say right now, looking outside of race at the harm equation, looking, through a gendered lens, women who've been harmed by sexual violence, those who have caused it. I'm coming to understand there's a moment where someone is ready to have a conversation around accountability or around speaking out loud about what they're going through as someone who's been harmed or someone who's caused harm. There's incredible vulnerability. So Betty McKay spoke with us last week. She's one of my colleagues in SE, and she said to this group of people, she's like, I don't know you. I don't know how you're going to react to me. That is scary. And so there's a moment where people are ready. And I think my hope with Apparatus of Repair is to catch some people in that moment of readiness. There are also people who are not ready, who want nothing to do with the conversation that is not, you are going to be punished forever for doing that to me or my family, and I hope you never get out. I don't think I'm a good person to talk to that person, but there is that beautiful moment. And also from the other side, there's a moment when you talk to Sean Pika, he talks about, the first several years, he wasn't ready for any kind of conversation like this. It took a while. So I feel like the role of this project is to catch folks in that moment.
Wonderful. All right, so we're going to turn, and while people hopefully share some questions again in the Q&A or in the chat. Jo, is there one short last thing you want to leave us with as we go away? Anything.
Well, as we are, kind of deeply in the planning process right now between Bethany and my team. And I just want to express some gratitude to Bethany for seeing the drawings and not saying, oh no, never mind, this is like a whole lot of rigging. Just for, we are building a little city on your roof, and it's really great to be invited. It's really great to be invited to a facility where we met folks once, and then they asked us back, you asked us back. It feels really good. It feels like, oh, okay, the work must be working in some way. And I just really want to invite audiences, whether they come to the open rehearsal we're doing in April or they come to the full shows in October. I just hope that the piece can spread the warmth of that invitation, that we're having hard conversation and asking hard questions inside a warmth that kind of buttresses the vulnerability a little bit. So I just feel a lot of gratitude to Bethany for allowing us to come and do that.
Well, we're so happy that you're coming, and we might have to pick David off the floor periodically when he sees another drawing, but I know we're going to all get there, and that's exciting. And I do want to also just say, of course, again, thank you to to Sean Pica at Hudson Link and to the entire Hudson Link for Higher Education. We might as well give the full name, and the team at Sing Sing Prison Museum, who's also working with us and sponsoring the production in the fall. It's those kinds of partnerships and relationships that's so important to everything that we do. We really appreciate that. So now let me see, I'm seeing that we've got a couple things here in the chat, and I just need to be able to get to that window. So we also have, of course, the Sing Sing Family Collective, who's as well involved with this. So the individual that you are now connected with on the inside is the founder of the Sing Sing Family Collective. And he and people like Anna Adler and many other folks are really doing wonderful work, and we are very happy to have their collaboration and happy that they've made the connection. So that you have your partner on the inside here. So
yeah, that's really hard to do, and we've I'm not naming him because I'm just not sure what public, but we've been on email, jamming on email. It's good.
That's great. That's really wonderful. So I'll give folks one more moment if anybody else wants to ask a question. In the meantime, I will remind folks that we do have the open rehearsal in April when Jo is at Bethany. And then the production will be in October. In September, we also plan on doing one more webinar where we will, having gone through the development phase in April, hopefully share more of that. And maybe with some luck have your collaborator with us in some small fashion, if we can make that possible in that as well. So the one other question that I've got here is, you mentioned the SE Sisters several times throughout. Can you just explain who the SE Sisters are?
Yes, that's a great question. SE Justice Group is an organization that's based in California. It's based in both Los Angeles and Oakland, and it is a member-driven organization. There are now over 200 members. The members are women with incarcerated loved ones. So we gather, you are invited, or you apply. You don't even apply, really. I guess you apply, but no one's ever turned down. But you identify yourself as someone, and so the first step in SE Sisterhood is that you do an 8-week healing to advocacy cohort. So there's a lot of crying. There's a lot of coming out of the shame of having an incarcerated loved one, because it's not something that's talked about very comfortably in many families, in communities, in schools. And then we organize ourselves to become active politically, to, tear the walls down, basically. For myself, that means this year I am one of 3 co-chairs on the campaign team. So we are engaged in legislative action with the California legislature to get legislation passed that supports ending mass incarceration. For example, SE is part of a Care First coalition. So the idea is Care First, Jails Last. That is supporting a study for alternatives to incarceration. The second piece of legislation we're supporting is around deepening survivor support that is offered not through carceral systems. So that is offered through community-based support. And it's a way longer conversation to talk about why that's really important. But my own experience of probation and the kind of lack of support and the punitive drive in that was so negative that I just think that it's too late for those systems for many of those systems. Maybe there's an exception here or there, but at least in the experience of all the SE sisters that I know, we're really interested in investment in non-carceral support for survivors of harm. SE was founded by Gina Clayton. She is a Harvard graduate. I met her at the Equal Justice Society annual conference. So she's a Soros Fellow, and she had this vision that the women impacted by incarceration are actually really powerful and are a political voice. And that has been a big drive around gathering SE. SE is one of the co-sponsors nationally of Black Mama's Bailout. So every year, as part of trying to end cash bail, we support bailing out at least one or two Black mothers in California who can't afford, are in jail because they can't afford the bail. So that's just a little bit of info.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you, Jo. Thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure. And I feel like every conversation I have with you, not only do I enjoy it, but I learn something new, which is great. So I really appreciate it. And I can't wait till you're actually with us at Bethany in April. And with that, I think we'll say thank you. And thank you to everybody who joined us, and hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you, Abby.
Bye.